Hi everyone, Mike Hancock here, and this time around I'm welcoming a very good friend of mine. I was going to say a special friend, but a very good friend. I don't know what special friends are, I only have good friends. And this is Hani Du Toit, or Hani Du Toit, depending on which way you want to say that. And Hani is an inclusion specialist based out of Cape Town in South Africa, and somebody we've worked with for a few years now, and somebody both Lundy Jack and myself enjoy immensely and enjoy every time that we see you face to face. So our face to face today is online. How are you doing, Hani?
Hi, Mike. Thank you. I'm doing well. I think it's been a roller coaster few weeks, but the good thing about having a supportive network is one can coast all the ups and the downs. So I'm doing well. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's true. We can. Now, let's just start by giving some people an idea of how you really got into this whole inclusion area. And I know you use that word instead of using the word diversity as well. So maybe you want to speak to that. And the other thing is, I know you're a lover of people, and I see your highest joy when you're around people also. So where did it all start for you?
That's a very, I think, important question because I think I'd have to go back to my early childhood and my own experience growing up in apartheid.
Right.
Um, the I was probably in my teens when I could make sense of a memory of being 5 years old, playing in my neighbor's garden, and hiding under a tree with my eyes stinging and tearing and not knowing what was going on because there were army tanks coming down our road, there were
Wow.
screaming students coming down our road, and I had this memory for many years without understanding it. And only as a teenager, when I was involved in the student uprising against the apartheid government, did I recognize that that was 1976. I was 5 years old, and the student uprisings of 76 were significant in shaping then my own commitment to creating a South Africa where everyone has a voice, where everyone recognizes each other, regardless of whatever apparent differences there may be. So that
Oh, yeah.
journey of wanting to create that future, I think is very much the beginning of my journey as an inclusion specialist.
And these days, it's not just South Africa you're helping, it's people much more broadly than that. But particularly, I'm interested in how you felt, what you felt on that day back in 1976. What was the emotion that you dealt with? And it's still with you today, what is it, 35, 45 years later, however long it is. And so obviously it was a profound moment in your life that you'll never forget. So what did you feel?
Yeah, I think at first it was absolute confusion and very, very afraid. And I think that that fear space, coupled with confusion, is what's universal. You know, when we're dealing with uncertainty and uncertain times, and we experience this heightened fear, in that case, as a 5-year-old, there's nothing to do but hide and try to be safe. And when I look back on that, I can see how that trigger response, when I recognize that I'm facing the choice that I have, do I want to keep hiding or do I want to step out and take some form of action? And that's really what's motivated me to be in the space, is recognizing that feeling of fear and confusion. And it's coupled with a sense of not belonging, because, you know, I felt very much on my own in that garden, under that tree. There was nobody around to protect me or to say what was going on or to tell me what to do next. So that experience of being alone is something that I can recognize in other people now, in organizations, in many different cultures around the world, when people experience isolation, when people experience being cut off, uncertain, afraid, and what is it that they would want? That's definitely what keeps propelling me.
Yeah, sure. When I was 5 years old, I had a different, but I guess similar experience in some respects, because I used to experience my father coming home drunk and beating up my mother, and he wasn't just beating her up; he was really laying into her. And I too was looking for that place to hide, and I couldn't hide at 7, 8, 10 o'clock at night, because I'd get dragged out from wherever ever I was, and that sort of stuff stays with you. But I think it's also those things that in many ways define you, and for you have sent you on a path that's brought you right to this moment where we're talking today. And if that hadn't have happened, we wouldn't have met. A lot of your friends you wouldn't have met. A lot of the amazing differences that you've made on the planet for leaders, organizations, people, communities, etc., would not have happened. So I've found something very fascinating. I'm going to bring this up right up front, and because it's a little controversial, that's why I haven't told you about what we're going to talk about so much, but it's okay. Don't panic too much. I was blown away because we were in New Zealand, and we decided that we needed to get out of New Zealand. They were going to close the borders, and we needed to come to our South African home because that's where the dog is. So if we were going to be stuck anywhere, we'd like to be stuck here. We're on the beach, etc., etc. Much, much nicer. Then I realized something, and then then I saw it again happening in Australia. So this is what happened in New Zealand. Anybody who basically was not a New Zealand citizen was asked to leave. So, nice of you to visit our country, off you go, see ya. And then in Australia, 4% of the Australian workforce is from New Zealand, and the Australian Prime Minister came out and made a bold announcement: we are going to fund your salary. If you lose your job or can't turn up to work, we will fund your salary. But if you're a New Zealander, I'm sorry, you're not Australian, so bad luck. Even though you've lived here for 30 years and are considered a resident and have needed no documentation to live, work, and contribute to our economy, you can now bugger off. So from that perspective, I mean, are these people just playing lip service to diversity? And because to me, this was I sort of went, diversity, culture, multiculturalism, loving your neighbor. It's all right for a prime minister to get up and make a great speech after somebody shot at a mosque, but then the next time when she's actually got to look after a whole bunch of races that don't live there, she wants to send them on the first plane home. I mean, what's going on in the world? So that's my controversy. I'm really interested to hear your perspective on it, because I know you have such beautiful rounding perspectives on things like this, whereas I tend to hit them like a bullet head on.
Mike, I'm so glad you actually raised that, because to be honest, when I spoke about the roller coaster we're experiencing in the last few weeks, a big part of my lows in this ride has been noticing those kinds of issues. As you are very aware in South Africa as well, the disparity, the social and political and economic disparity is just highlighted in this crisis, where everybody's under lockdown. And those of us who have fridges and freezers can stock up and stockpile, and some people are really going to town on that. But people who are living in tin shacks without any fridges have to go out and get something every day, and they're being accused of not practicing the lockdown protocols. So it's another example of that, not just the disparity, but how we are not really thinking of all our people when we mete out policy, and we want to stick to protocols and procedures. But it takes me back to another one of the memories, also around the age of 6. So coupled with the first one I spoke to, I was sent home in grade 1. We used to call it sub A. So it was my first few months at school, and the school was also doing some kind of tally. I attended a Muslim school or an Islamic school, but they sent us home with the paper where our parents needed to sign and say, are you black, white, colored, or Indian? So I couldn't read it all at this stage. I took the page home and I was very excited to tell my dad, you know, you've got to sign this thing and you've got to tell my teacher, am I black, white, colored, or Indian? And I was excited to just take a form back to school that had my dad's signature on it, not knowing what on earth I was talking about. And my dad blew his top and he shouted at me, tell your teacher you're none of those things, you're human. And that's all.
That's great.
And he refused to sign it.
That is fantastic.
And that's my bridge from diversity to inclusion. Because you're right, Mike, we can talk about diverse cultures and how we celebrate our differences. But if we're not talking about how we all belong, if we're not talking about why I'm including you in X, or why you're part of the solution, then what's the point of celebrating our differences? And so for me, that memory that we're human and that's the only factor that we need to bring. We can be as fascinated as we want to be with each other's uniqueness, with our individual diversity, whether it's creative thinking versus linear thinking, whether it's, you know, being European versus being African, whether it's being Muslim versus being anything else, atheist or Christian or Hindu or Buddhist. We can talk about all the diversity, but if we're not going to relate to each other, human being to human being, like there's an equal value placed on contribution, then we're not really celebrating much.
Hani, let me just ask you this question. I totally agree with you. So here we are moving into post-COVID, meaning, you know, lockdowns are sort of coming down around the world and we've got to get on with it. What does that mean for inclusionism? And because I have one view and my other view, which I'll let you know, but I'm interested in yours because you're the expert. I think all this working at home is going to open opportunities for disabled people who can't drive to a place of work to work, because now they can become fully accepted in the workforce because they're working from home, just because they're in a wheelchair or you know, they struggle with some degenerative disease or something like that. They can actually now, with everything happening, fully be included in a workforce, whereas I'm a little worried that other workforces, other minorities, if you like, may be excluded in future. Do you have a view or any tips for employers or anything like that?
Yes, in fact, I've been seeing the changes happening in the last couple of weeks with some of my clients. And my concern is about those people who are losing the opportunity to remain engaged and productive, and to experience the care of their leaders because they don't have the internet connections or the data facilities and access that they would have had they been in the office, or had they been fully supported despite their socioeconomic situation. So to touch on the question of the the broader opportunities for people with disabilities, I think certainly the factor for recruitment is going to be people's adaptability and access to be able to meet like this online, and to be able to showcase their skill in this way and provide support services in the background. And that will mean we can include a host of people that were otherwise excluded. And I think that's an amazing thing. But it does also mean that if organizational leaders aren't going to make up in how how employees are taken care of. And I spent yesterday online, in fact, not in this manner, because the people who line, or they don't have Zoom. So I spent time doing telephone calls of support to those people because their leaders weren't doing it. Their
Right.
leaders were just saying, well, if you can't access it, you're counting yourself out. You're not on the Zoom call with the rest of us. And otherwise, using WhatsApp to support, taking in someone's voice and being able to make a plan. So it's been interesting how different organizations, because some of the nonprofits I service or serve have been giving all their staff data SIMs, and their finance department has been loading data weekly. So they're showing their commitment to have everybody remain relevant, productive, and cared for. While others are saying, well, you know, tough luck if you don't have that kind of opportunity. So we're definitely going to see lots of changes. One of the things, Mike, that I often advocate when people are talking about creating a culture of inclusion, I talk about 5 C's, and that's curiosity, candor, creativity, and courage. But
Right.
the 5th C is the overarching C, and that's caring. We can't expect people to be courageous and take new leaps into the uncertain future when we haven't shown care as leaders. And we can't expect people to be curious about how they can be creative when we haven't showed care. So caring on the part of leaders in this time for creating this culture for the future is going to be critical.
Yeah, very good points, Hani. I'm interested to find out from you, because I think one of the reasons cultures have come together more, and we'll stick with cultures in terms of diversity at the moment, is because travel has been so affordable. You know, AirAsia has a mantra, now everyone can fly, because Ryanair was doing flights. I actually got a flight in Europe at one stage a couple of years ago for €1 each for Lundy and I. So, I mean, that's definitely, people can afford €1. But here we are moving post-COVID. A lot of organizations are saying, hey, we can do a lot of stuff online. You don't need to fly. I was talking to somebody in Malaysia yesterday, and they were saying a client of theirs has used Zoom for the first time and realizes that for years he's been driving from Penang to KL twice a week, and he didn't need to do it. So, I mean, all of this is coming, but I have a little concern at the back of me that is going to make our world more village operated and not as global. So we're going to come back and become more insular, which means we're going to lose our understanding of the planet, etc. What do you see happening in people and cultures in the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
That's a fascinating question. I'm going to say up front, I'm not a futurist. And at the same time, I agree with you that the question of how we are going to familiarize ourselves with different cultures is something that I've been asking myself when I see that what's predictable is people will reduce travel. I'm hoping they'll travel more for enjoyment and enrichment of culture than they do for work, because I think there's been a lot of unnecessary travel that's work related. Completely agree with you. The idea of tourism and conferencing merging, which has really shaped the last 5 to 10 years, has been part of a big part of travel and tourism income based on business conferencing. And if business conferencing goes completely online, then we're going to see a reduction in that, which means everybody has to rethink how they're going to do tourism. I'm loath to think of tourism as a virtual reality because how do I taste the food in Thailand and in India and every other place I've loved traveling to?
But you're an excellent cook, so I'm sure you can taste it. You just have to make it.
It's just not the same thing, right? So I share your concern there that how travel's impacted is definitely going to affect what I like to see as our cultural intelligence. And so maybe what that does mean is when we are working on these with remote teams across the world, that we maintain a real interest in each other and not only use our online contact for productivity.
Mm. Mm. Very good. So let me shift the ball a little bit. One of the statistics I quote in my new book, Conscious Leadership, and it was done from a survey last year, and this is a fascinating sort of preface to my question for you, is 72% of English-speaking peoples are now on the internet. That means that 400 million English-speaking people are not on the internet. So that is an amazing market. You know, Newton's law, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So there's a whole bunch of people that are not on the internet today in 2020 that live in first and second world countries. So my question, keeping that in mind, because the internet isn't the only answer, and that's why I'm sort of preempting it with that. And English speaking has the highest percentage of people users on the internet. When you get to Spanish and Portuguese, it drops considerably. But when we look at the world of our near future, what do you think our responsibility is as middle class and upper class, of course, middle class citizens in a comfortable country where we can live good, solid middle class lifestyles, where we have a freezer, where we have a TV, where we have 3 bedrooms, one for us and one for our kids, where we have a backyard to walk the dog, or a park that we feel safe going to? What do you think our responsibility is for the planet in diversity, inclusion, and the bringing together of people over the next few years?
A very, very powerful question. I read a very beautiful article by Max de Vries earlier this week. And he actually advocated and made a really loud call that if the middle class doesn't get that they need to put their hands in their pockets and, you know, contribute towards the creation of this world that takes care of those who are left out of the comfort zone, let's call it that, then we're actually inviting a bigger crisis. So when I just look in and I'll just talk to the South African context, again, looking at the socioeconomic situation, and in our country, unfortunately, the vast majority of impoverished people are Black people. The reality is that we need to contribute to the kinds of programs and projects that are going to ensure that people living in those conditions are taken care of. And that's not just with regards to making sure they've got bread to eat. It's about the education, it's about the access, it's about sanitation and clean water. It's about being able to live decent lives with dignity, because without that, we're increasing the degree of frustration and anger amongst people in our country, the vast majority of people. And I've seen articles written around India looking at similar concerns, that the lockdown that's being imposed doesn't take into consideration people who are living under the conditions of extreme poverty. And if we look at the population size of India, we're not talking about a problem for India, we're talking about a global problem.
Yeah, exactly.
So definitely the middle class needs to be, we need to be willing to we need to be willing to give up the me culture. I'm going to take care of me, myself, and I. And as long as I'm okay, things will be fine. We're going to see the lie of that playing out. And that's what I'm seeing right now. I've seen on my newsfeed a lot of very angry youth saying that they're not going to tolerate that they're simply cut out and on the sidelines, and that the circumstance and situation hasn't been considered for the policies that are rolled out.
And do you think that this is just a government responsibility, or how can we become more consciously responsible as private citizens?
So definitely I think part of the problem is we've left everything to governments to solve, as if we don't have agency. And there needs to be a stepping up as active, engaged citizens. And And I think when we do that, we're going to find brilliant solutions, because there's an untapped genius in our communities, while people have been defaulting and deferring to government to solve problems. So certainly we're already seeing the pulling together of forums and coalitions. In fact, just yesterday I received an email from the People's Coalition for South Africa, pulling together to come up with solutions and to activate the cash flow in communities and say, what are we going to put towards solving these problems? It needs to be that everybody sees it as their personal responsibility. One of the things that we have is called Fard Kifaya. And Fard Kifaya means an obligation on the entire community. And amongst those are things like burying the dead. The interesting thing is that it's not just one person's responsibility. Everybody's responsible for it until somebody goes and does it. Then you know your obligations fulfilled, that somebody actually did it. And that's why funerals are so big in our culture, because everybody feels it's their personal obligation. And I think this concept of experiencing a personal obligation in community is what we need to see more of going forward.
Yeah, you triggered some definite thoughts there. But let me segue to this, Hani. Regardless of me saying you're a good friend earlier, you are very special, because you've really built a very, very solid business in helping organizations with all the difficulties that we've been talking about. So maybe just tell us about one or two of the signature things that you do. And then if a leader is listening, doesn't matter how big or how small their organization is, we'll have links on this of how to connect with you on LinkedIn, or if you have a product or something like that that you think that would be wise for them to look at, let us know about that, and then we'll get into a couple more questions.
So one of the tools that I use, but maybe I should rather say programs that I run. I don't believe in working with clients or organizations on a once-off basis, because I believe in sustainable learning and sustained progress. So I don't do any once-off interventions. What I do is meet up with people and really listen to what are the kinds of challenges they have within the organization and with their people that makes them think it's time to reach out to me. And the kinds of things that I come across is that people have found someone accusing their leaders of either sexism or racism, or just not sharing power, not inviting others into the decision making. And so these exclusionary behaviors are the kinds of things that are red flags for companies, that they need to consult to find what is it we need to do more of and what is it we need to do less of, in order to make progress and create an inclusive culture where people feel they belong and where they feel valued and where they feel connected. And one of the programs that I then bring into companies is what I call a toolbox for courageous conversations. Because the truth is that everything happens in conversation. And in that toolbox, we take people through a number of different processes or models for conversations that they can use when we've primed them with an awareness of what has us shut down and not engage courageously in conversation. So I bring tools from a neuroscience perspective, where we deal with elements of conversational intelligence based on the work of Judith Glaser. And we have people understand what I now call the just like me effect. So of course that's embedded in that memory I told you of my father shouting at me that we're all human, right? And so the just like me effect is about understanding that the brain's looking at all times to identify who I'm engaging with as a friend or foe. And if the brain's looking for that all the time, how do I prime my brain to find a friend, even when I think I'm dealing with a foe?
Very
How do
nice.
I look for commonalities instead of differences? And that's really what my focus is, like finding the common ground. And when I see the difference, how can I frame that difference as a gift that can support me rather than an otherness?
Hmm. Stunning stuff. And so we'll put a link there, honey, so people can connect with you. But it leads me into um, something that I want to ask you is that, you know, people are going to go back to work, and, you know, it definitely may be more online. It may be over time that it comes back to the way we saw it. Nobody knows now, and none of us are futurists, not even the futurists. This is raw ground for them. I always love that people say they can predict the future and what's going to happen, yet in a 1992 study by Harvard University of the greatest trends over the next 10 years, nobody mentioned the introduction of the internet. So,
Wow.
so if we miss that one, then we're going to miss a lot of things. So none of us are geniuses. But as we go back into this working environment, which could be online, we've got all the things that we experience at work, from bullying to people grandstanding to people's own agendas, politics, all of that sort of stuff. What in your mind would be one or two signature sort of, oh, gee, we're not being inclusive. Oh, that even though we've got the best heart, we're literally creating a poor environment here. What would be one or two things like that that you could see generally pop up in an organization, or you could expect to in a more online world, that could be red flags for people who are not living what I call unity and diversity?
Um, Mike, I think that a big question that people need to be asking themselves is, who have they forgotten about? Now, when you've forgotten about somebody, then that may be a hard question to answer. But I do think that as people go back into the workspace, whatever space that's going to be, they do need to ask that question. Peter Hawkins speaks about the 13th fairy. And when we talk about the fairy tale, I think it's Sleeping Beauty, the 13th fairy cast a spell because she was not invited. So the power of exclusion, she was a good fairy until she was not invited. And then the anger and the rejection was such that she became the fairy that cast the spell. And so he's always advocating, and I think it's such a lovely metaphor, because we're all guilty of creating a 13th fairy. You know, we include the people who are quite obvious, and we forget somebody, thinking, no, they don't need to be here, or they'll get it from somebody else or whatever. But that 13th fairy can be the fairy that creates all the chaos. So I think it's an important question for people to ask: who have we left out? Who have we forgotten? And it may not be somebody who's usually, because you won't forget the person who's usually vocal. They'll be there, they'll invite themselves. But we do need to ask those important questions, because that's what inclusion is about. It's about being willing to listen to and listen for real gold from an unexpected place. And if we don't count everyone in, if CEOs don't check in with the tea lady, they're missing something really, really important. And I think that's the kind of thing leaders need to be aware of. Have I checked in with the person because who's serving you tea now? It's not the tea lady. So they're not going to be on the Zoom calls, but we do need to care about them.
Absolutely. I love it. It's a very, very good point. And I think you know this, but over the last couple of weeks, I've been really encouraging people to use that old device called the phone, right? And there it is.
Exactly.
And actually pick up the phone and ring some people. And you know, my pitch on the phone is and I'm not talking about clients here. I actually haven't rung any clients, because we talk to our clients every day. But I've rung a whole bunch of friends. I've rung strategic alliances. I've rung people who have supplied us with stuff. I've rung people who I've randomly met, who I like, and I've rung people I've worked with for years and said, hi, honey, you know, Mike and Lundy here. We were just thinking of you and I'm just sending you some love. How are you doing? And I've got to tell you that I've got two interesting things with that. One is, number one is people are blown away and it often elicits great conversation. And secondly, I've been sharing that now for 2 weeks. Not one person has ever done that to me. And I've got a massive network. It's like, you know, we've got hundreds of thousands of people in our network. Not one person has even sent us an email, let alone a phone call. So I think this, to be inclusive, you know, folks, use the phone, pick it up and actually talk to some people, which brings me to my last question for you for today, Hani. Us, individuals in our conscious leader self, what would be 3 actions we could take over the coming months to ensure that we are consciously being inclusive of others around us?
That's a good one.
I
I
always
think
ask tough
that,
questions.
yes, you do. I think the first action would definitely be matching what you just said now, is picking up the phone and actually speaking to people. And by that, I don't just mean the usual friends. I've seen a lot of people doing their online sipping wine at a certain time of day, or having a braai,
Yeah.
or putting on their special hats and socializing. And those are all cool things to do, but I do think that they're not as personal as that call is. And I think the important thing with that call is to make sure that that call is a caring call, is to actually find out how that person's doing. And usually when we ask that question, how are you, there's a very canned response, right? I'm fine. And so I think people need to be conscious of what's the question I'm going to ask that'll actually have somebody think and respond. And so I really recommend that people ask the question, who's supporting you? What are you doing to cope with the challenges? And these are slightly different questions than the how are you question,
Great.
but it prompts the person to give a thought out response. So I think that is a telephone call is important. I also think what's important is for people to sit down and do some thinking and planning, and not as a very structured plan, but more as a creative and aspirational thinking. What's the kind of environment I want to create after this? And I'm saying that because we've all seen that this has created a shift. I've seen pictures now, videos of the dolphins in Hart Bay. They say that the dolphins in Venice wasn't true, but anyway, I don't know. Bottom line is, we are seeing shifts in nature as we've retreated. And this is a cue for us, I think, that there's a different way we need to behave going forward. And so if we don't start to think about what that's like on an individual basis, what are some of the things I would need to give up? What are some of the things, new habits I want to create going forward that serve people and the planet? If I'm not going to do that thinking now and make some commitments now, I am just going to go back to my default habits going forward, and nothing would have changed.
Yeah.
And I think the third action I would then recommend is that we meet not for the sake of having a meeting, but we meet with other like-minded individuals to talk through that creation, to talk through those aspirations. And we can create some kind of community and accountability around what are we going to do differently.
Fantastic advice. Really, really good advice. And I think I'll just put a little one on the end there, because a number of people who are watching this call will be living in Asia or Africa, where they're living in buildings. And in those buildings, there's a lot of people that used to cut the lawn, used to take out the rubbish, used to sweep the floors, who are probably the first people to be laid off by the the trustees in this situation. They're certainly at home in lockdown, and those people won't have a lot of savings. So I think one of the things you can do if you're in one of those buildings is to contact your building manager and recommend that an email goes out to the people in the building and a food drive is done that can be picked up by some of these people to help feed their families through that troubled time, just to add something. Hani, it's been an absolute pleasure, as I knew it would be, having you on the call today. I really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you in real life and giving you a hug next time we're all allowed to do that. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mike. It's been an absolute pleasure on my side as well. Thank you. And I'm sure I'm going to be thinking about some of your questions as we continue through the day. Great chatting to you, though.
Bye.
Thanks for letting me take part in this, because conscious leadership is definitely what's needed.
Absolutely.